Good evening. Thank you so much for all being here on Thursday of week 8. I know it's a busy and tiring time of term. In case you don't know me, I'm Tara Talwar Windsor and I'm a postdoctoral research associate in German in the Faculty of Modern Languages and Linguistics here in Cambridge. I have the great privilege of working with a fabulous team on a Horizon UKRI-funded project called the Cartography of the Political Novel in Europe, and co-leading a research group called Cultural Production and Social Justice. I also teach a final year module called Unmasterable Past, Historical Controversies and the Politics of Memory, and it's really good to see so many of the students here taking that module. And the reason I'm mentioning all of that is because it's all relevant to why we've decided to invite Asal. I'm also a member of the management committee of the Cambridge DAAD Hub for German Studies, which is our host institution for this event. And just briefly, for anyone who isn't familiar with the Hub, it's a forum or centre for Germany-related research involving a community of scholars working in a broad range of fields, connecting experts across the university and more broadly in the UK, Germany and worldwide. The annual lecture is an important event in the Hub's calendar, and we're really delighted to welcome Asal Dardan this evening as our speaker, although she won't be lecturing as such, as you'll see. Thank you so much, Asal, for making the journey from Berlin here to be with us. Before I introduce you properly, though, I do have a few other words of thanks which I want to start with. So firstly, many thanks to the conference and catering teams here at Trinity Hall for hosting us and for their organisational support, and also to the AV technicians who are here to record the event for us. Many, many thanks to Leila Mukida, Andrew Webber, and the Part 2 Advanced Translation students who translated the extract that Asal will read in German into English. So if there's anyone here in the audience who would like to have a copy of the English to follow, Asal's going to read in German, but there's English, then they will circulate. Miriam's got them, so maybe you could just send a few round. But for copyright reasons, we'd like to ask you not to distribute them publicly after the event. I'd also like to thank the co-directors of the Hub, Chris Young and Chris Clark, as well as the Deputy Director, Leila Mukida, who's also a fellow here at Trinity Hall, and the rest of the Hub Management Committee for making it possible for us to host Asal here this evening. Thank you also to Catherine Ross for setting up the Eventbrite and for helping with the publicity and comms. And last but not least, and sadly in her absence, thanks to our Hub coordinator, Ingrid Hobbis, for all her support, advice and hard work, not only on this event, but everything else that the Hub does. She's sadly unwell today, so she can't be with us, but we're sending get well wishes along with our immense gratitude. So now I can come to the main event and introduce Asal Dardan, who was born in Tehran in 1978 and grew up in Cologne, Bonn and Aberdeen. I'm going to interject here that it's a very German thing to give that precise biographical information.
Yeah.
We don't do that here,
No,
right?
Marlene Dietrich was more clever about it, but yeah.
And I ummed and ahed about whether to do it, and then I thought the detail about where you grew up is important, and the timing is also important, so there you go.
Yes.
She also studied cultural studies in Hildesheim and Middle Eastern studies in Lund, and she now lives in Berlin and Irland. She was awarded the Caroline Schläger Prize for essay writing for her text Neue Jahre, New Year's, and her essay collection Betrachtungen einer Barbarin, Reflections of a Barbarian, came out in 2021 and was nominated for the German Non-Fiction Prize and the Clemens Brentano Prize. Her latest book, Traumaland, was published in January this year and featured in a list of most important non-fiction books curated by 30 jurors for the ZDF, Deutschlandfunk Kultur and Die Zeit in February 2025. And it has just been issued in a second edition, right, yesterday, which means that, as Asal pointed out on Instagram yesterday, it's already reached many readers and it will now reach even more. She's also contributed to many anthologies, such as Anders Bleiben, which is this one here, and Anders Bleiben Briefe der Hoffnung in verhärteten Zeiten und trotzdem sprechen, and regularly appears on podcasts, including a recent episode of a new series called Geteilte Erinnerung zwischen Palästina, Israel und Deutschland. In May 2023, she gave the first Erika Mann lecture at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and this year she was part of a collaborative radio adaptation of Peter Weiss's Ästhetik des Widerstands for Deutschlandfunk Kultur, which you can listen to on the DLF website. She is also a jury member for the International Literature Prize awarded by the Haus der Kultur in der Welt. And as a translator herself, she's translated works by Namwali Serpal and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie into German. In short, she's one of the most interesting, prolific and important writers and public intellectuals in Germany today. And I first met Asal when I was taking part in the summer school of the British Centre for Literary Translation in July 2021. and I was part of an incredible group of about 10 translators, all women, who worked together to translate the aforementioned essay Neue Jahre. And I've been going to her events, following her on social media, and also been in contact with her for quite a long time since then. And so I'm really delighted to finally have the chance to be on stage with you, Asal. A quick note on the format that we've planned. We've got about, slightly less now, but about an hour or so for our conversation and Asal's reading. And then we will open the floor to for questions from you. We are recording the event, as I mentioned, so just so you're aware of that if you want to ask a question afterwards. So now we can get to the first question. And I wanted to start with quite a broad question for you, Asal.
Just let me say, I'm so grateful for being here and for this lovely introduction. Thank you so much, Tara.
We're really, really excited that you're here as well. I've really been thinking about this since I came to Cambridge in September 2021.
Oh my God.
So it's
What an honour, what an honour.
And also it's just in time before I depart
Yes.
as well. So yeah. Okay, so my first question is relating to a lot of my preamble. I wanted to ask you how you would describe the development of your writing since Betrachtungen einer Barbarin in 2021 to Traumaland, which has come out, and you've been on the road with that book all year.
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think in a way Traumaland comes out of my traveling with the first book. I don't think I could have actually written this without the experience. And what I experienced, in fact, with, because Reflections of a Barbarian, or Betrachtung einer Barbarin, I wrote mainly as a mother stuck on a Swedish island at my kitchen table. And with the book, I was allowed to travel through Germany. And through traveling through Germany and meeting people, I suddenly noticed, I mean, it's anecdotal because, of course, people who come to my readings are not everyone in Germany, but I suddenly noticed that the people in the country are much better than our discourses. And they actually gave me hope, these meetings with people. I met people who in small regions, they really, work against the fascist turn, and they're very engaged, and they in their work already, they connect a lot of them, they would do something for the victims of the Holocaust in their town to commemorate them, and at the same time they were doing refugee work. So in a way, they, through their actions, their practice, were already connecting things that, a lot of people debate in intellectual circles whether you're allowed to connect them, So my first book kind of led me to this book. And also I already wrote my diploma thesis on the filmic remembrance of the Holocaust. So I've been, dealing with these issues for a very long time. And when I don't know if you're gonna, but when I went to Hanau in 2021 and I got off the train, I suddenly realized, oh my God, Hanau, which is a place where 9 young people were murdered in a racist terrorist attack in February 2020. And I got off the train and I suddenly felt like, oh my God, this place is not scary. And I had expected it to be an eerie place, but it was a very normal, ordinary, actually very friendly people also I met there, village or town. And I suddenly realized that I had this map in my head of German cities that I only know their names of because of an attack such as this, like Mölln or Solingen, Merseburg, Rostock-Lichtenhagen, Hoyerswerda. And I felt that's something peculiar and also scary about the country. And I also feel it is a map that some people carry within them and others don't. And that was the first step to Traumaland.
So that actual moment when you arrived in Hanau.
Yes, because I felt like, oh my God, this is like Bergisch Gladbach, where I grew up, outside of Cologne. And yeah.
That leads perfectly to the next thing that I wanted to ask you. So the book blurb says that you conjure a new topography of Germany. And in the epilogue, you explain your approach as quote, Zeiten wie ein Straßennetz, an dessen Kreuzungen ich mich überall befinden möchte. Ich suche Zeitspuren im Raum, suche Schauplätze und Tatorte, suche die Weitläufigkeit von Landschaften. Ich suche nach der Offenheit und Gleichzeitigkeit, die Vergangenheit immer war, bevor sie zu Geschichte wurde. And we've just had a little group translation of that, so it roughly translates as time like intersecting streets. I want to stand at every junction simultaneously. I'm searching for traces of time and space, searching for sights and scenes, searching for vastness of landscapes. I'm searching for the openness and simultaneity of the past before it was turned into history. Could you maybe explain a bit about what you meant by Zeiten wie ein Straßennetz and how that relates to the concept and structure of the book?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the first person to, I mean, for example, Karl Schlögl, who was just awarded the Leipziger Friedenspreis des Buchhandels, he writes beautifully that im Raum lesen wir die Zeit. And I think that we all kind of experience that when we walk through a city. We sometimes have a sense of something else having been here, especially when architecture is old. And I feel, or let me give you another anecdote, which was actually the second step to Traumaland, where I knew this is what I have to write. I was, shortly after I was in Hanau, I was at a dinner with other writers. And I was telling them that I was thinking of writing about deutsche Traumaorte. And one of the cities I was thinking about going to and writing about was Dessau. And they all were, they said, wow, that's amazing, that's a really good idea. And only after a few minutes did we realize that they were talking about the Bauhaus in Dessau, but I was thinking of Uri Giallo and Alberto Adriano, two black men who were killed there by racists. And of course, I felt a bit embarrassed that my first thought was not the Bauhaus. And they said, oh yeah, of course, there was something. And I realized it's how you say, Prägung. It's what you basically almost feel in your body that makes you think of something first. Mm-hmm. But it was not that we're not all good-willed at the table or something, but it was just these racist murders of two black men. They really hit me hard, and they impacted on me, especially because Alberto Adriano, he was killed when I was still quite young. I was, just leaving school. And I thought, yes, why not both? Why not? I mean, that's what trauma is. And so, whereas Bauhaus and Alberto Adriano's murder, or Uri Giallo's murder, who was a black man from Sierra Leone who was killed in a police cell in Dessau by police, seem so far apart. In Dessau, suddenly you can see the continuity much better if you look at it from a sense of place. And Dessau also, or the Bauhaus, kind of shows you the range of what history means, because everybody kind of thinks of the Bauhaus as one of the victims of National Socialism, but it actually opens up all the possibilities of human decision-making, because there were people murdered in Auschwitz who studied at the Bauhaus, but there were also the crematorium of the Auschwitz was built by a Bauhäusler, by an architect from the Bauhaus. And there were people who dug their head and just, did their little jobs and waited for it to be over, and other people who resisted. And that's the scope of what the Bauhaus offers in a little. And so I decided, if I'm going to write about Dessau, I'm going to write about these centuries. I'm going to try and bring it together. And each city I went to, it resembled something more abstract. So, for example, Dessau is the chapter I think about the fragility of the human body in space, in public space, because I think the Bauhaus also was a utopian idea of offering, of thinking about the human body in space, the new human in rooms, and so yes, that was the second step towards this, and I think, the continuity of things and how they're connected. You can see it if you don't think of time on a how you say it, Zeitstrahl, but in space, in a located im Raum.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also have a chapter on Berlin, Cologne, and Hoyerswerda. Could you say a little bit about what made you pick those cities in particular?
Yeah. Well, Berlin, for one, is the city I know best in Germany because I've lived there quite long. I don't know any place really that well, but Berlin is the place I know best. And of course, it's our capital, and it is the city of many memorial sites. So I decided to write about Berlin in order to think about how we use public space for memory practices and memory, for commemorating the past and who it's made for. Who is remembered and who these sites are thought to address and who they forget. Mm-hmm. And so that's Berlin. And then while I was writing that, and I wrote a lot about Schöneberg, which is the area in Berlin where I live and which used to be a sort of bourgeois Jewish neighborhood. Albert Einstein lived there, and many poets and writers, and all these people were either like Gertrud Kolmer, she was killed, fantastic poet, and others survived because they managed to go into exile. So I started thinking about exile a lot, and Cologne was my parents' exile. So that's why I picked Cologne, because Cologne is also a city that has many diasporic communities, people from Turkey, and we also in Cologne have a big dispute about a memorial for the genocide of the Armenians, and so I felt I needed to write about exile and diaspora and what the difference actually is between both mm-hmm. terms and what they mean for Germany, mm-hmm. Because while people at the time were fleeing from Germany, and my parents came from somewhere else to end up in that country where others fled several decades before, these movements are still seen with a lot of disdain. Mm-hmm. So the disdain is still the same, it's just the roots have changed. And then I felt I need to get away from myself a bit. It was getting more intimate than I wanted it to be, maybe. And of course, I felt I needed to go to Eastern Germany as well, because it's a place I don't know that well. I'm a West German woman. I grew up there, and I wanted to understand what Eastern Germany also represents in our discourses. Mm-hmm. So then I went to Dessau and Hoyerswerda. Maybe we'll talk about it when we talk about Andersbleiben, I don't know. But I've always been, because I was born in Tehran and suddenly I ended up having a German childhood, I kind of wanted to understand what connects me with other people who have German childhoods. And in Andersbleiben, I wrote a letter to Judith Kerr, who should have had a German childhood, but then ended up becoming a British lady, and one of the, much loved English children book writers. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to understand what is a German childhood. And Hoyerswerda, during the time of the GDR, was actually the city with most children in GDR. It was kind of designed as the new model city for young families. So it was called Die kinderreichste Stadt der DDR. And oddly enough, Krabat, which is a classic of German youth literature or children's literature, is set in Hoyerswerda. And also when the program happened in Hoyerswerda after the fall of the wall, a lot of people said that's just young people. That's a sort of young people phenomena, frustrations of the young. It wasn't taken seriously. The racism coming up during that time. So I wanted to understand what is actually a German childhood. And I felt Hoyerswerda is the right place to go to look at that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you've already really given us a good insight into how you kind of connect lots of different places and different stories and histories, and you've also spoken about your own personal connection with this. And I know you wanted to get away from yourself, but let's come back to you, and talk a little bit about the relationship between history as a big concept, other people's history and personal history, and then your own story, because you talk about in the book how you came to thinking about your family history through your kind of, because you were learning about German history.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have to explain how we ended up having to leave Iran. My father actually worked for the Savak, which was the Shah's secret service, and which means a lot of people who left Iran before the revolution had to flee because of that regime that my father was a part of. And when I was 1 year old. I mean, I had my first birthday in Iran, but then I was basically just carried over some borders, like I have no recollection of the country. And when we were in Germany in my early years, there were magazines with, Bunte or whatever, and the Shah and, Faradiba. I mean, they were celebrated. They were, celebrities. So there was never a break in my image of them. And at home, they were revered, they were, it was sort of like, my idea of it was, there was this fantastic king and evil people came and, and we need to get him back. Or later on when he died, it was like the great injustice that had happened to him and we want his son back, like that's how I grew up. And also because no one liked Khomeini around me, so it was kind of, there was no break in my perception of that history. And then at school, when I learned about the 68er and the killing of Benno Ohnesorg, the student Benno Ohnesorg, he was killed in Berlin during the visit of the Shah. And then I learned about the demonstrations against the Shah, and I didn't understand why would people demonstrate against him, our lovely king. And so, in a way, for the first time, something about me was in this history book in my school, and also it was different than what I had learned about my history, and that was very influential to me, and very, very, painful also. And also something that I had to deal with. But I think knowing that the violence we expose each other in our countries doesn't stop only because we flee these countries. We take this violence with me. I mean, I live now, or even in writers, my colleagues like Mariam Aras or Sheida Bazia, they have different stories, and their parents actually fled from what my father stood for. So in a way, I can apply this experience to my dealing with German families and German history and how they deal with guilt. And I can also, because I go through the pain of working this through as much as I can, because my knowledge of it is very limited, but what my father did, But I also feel more that I can actually ask other people about how they deal with their guilt in their families, I would feel it's wrong to write about German crimes and German violence and without addressing that part of my own biography. Mm-hmm. And it's helped me, It's painful, but it helped me.
I've heard you say I'm going to deviate slightly from my script, in other interviews that you see your essay writing as kind of as an Angebot, as an offer to other people. Could you maybe explain what you mean by that in terms of, because you really do have to kind of delve into, as you put it before, intimate things for yourself and painful things for yourself as well. Are the two things connected, the Angebot and the difficulty in exploring those things?
Well, this is a bit something about essay writing per se. If you've ever read Vivian Gornick's The Story and the situation. I can really recommend it. It's a fantastic book for anyone who wants to write. It becomes clear that as an essayist, there has to be an I. There is an I, and that I has to be reliable, because whereas in a novel you can be a liar and there's enjoyment in reading that, an essayist has to be reliable, because otherwise you're not going to follow them in their thoughts. And so you and I think the best essays start with something very small or personal and open it up to something very big. So I don't want to actually talk about myself at all in these essays, but I think it's the easiest to show that I learned something, I didn't know something, and I arrived here, or to make transparent the ways and routes of thought and also life. And take people with, but it almost works like a mirror. Like I present myself as a mirror, and I say, okay, here, have a look. Can you see something that resembles your life or your experience? Or maybe you see something totally different. So yeah, it's an offer for people to, and also because in Germany there are millions of places I could have written about. Every city I go to with this book, they tell me, oh, by the way, there was this Gestapo building here, or they tell me about something that happened in their city. So this is just more of a tool to look at a country rather than, I could have written 10 Traumaland volumes,
Yeah. And I've heard you also say that it's a reliable I, but it's also not an authoritative. It's not a kind of an kind of imposing or projecting your own position. You're very much open, and you ask questions about yourself in a very self-reflexive I as well, which is also useful as a tool to think about how we all think about histories that we're kind of implicated in, and the spaces that we're implicated in. In one of our very first conversations about this event, I told you that the module that I teach on memory politics is part of a bigger paper called, and there are several people in the audience who teach on this, called Memory and Identity Since 1945. And your response was that it's the role of the writer to, quote, I wrote it down, shatter attempts to create identity from memory, end quote. And at one point in the book, you also describe writing as Handelndes Erinnern, so like active memory, remembering. And you really bring together a vast range of writers and thinkers, and you embed yourself in that incredibly rich network of knowledge. And I think when I've got a spare 5 minutes, I'm going to try and do a map of all the people that you refer to, and somehow, because I think that, and this is why I mentioned the cartography of the political novel in Europe, because there's lots of mapping and cartography kind of going on in all of our work that we do. So to kind of think about the connections that you draw between writers from different places and from with different styles, and they all kind of bring something different. But what I wanted to ask you, with all of that in mind, is whether you see your book as a literary intervention into contemporary German or perhaps European memory culture.
Yeah, well, I'd like it to be that. And in a way, I feel I am almost like how you call these children's toys that you hang over their beds, mobile. Yeah, a mobile. Yeah. I almost feel like my book is part of a mobile, and Michael Rothberg's book is also there, and other books, and we are kind of, we stabilize each other and lead each other through this, and that's why it's so enriching, or why I would always, I draw on so many other writers, past and present, and I think one of my main aims is to, especially today, to say that remembrance should be practice, should be doing. Mm-hmm. And not something you feel you are, or something that is established and then it's static. It's activity, it's praxis. And I also see a danger in memory culture becoming something that builds up a collective identity that in turn becomes violent. And it's almost counterintuitive that from genocide, from a violent act, from Holocaust could come something that stabilizes a German identity again. But I do feel there is this danger, or it's happening, and so I want to shatter that. I want to take my book and go, no, you can't have that again, ever again. So yes, I would hope that that's what it's doing.
Do you think that that kind of idea of memory as praxis is something that's missing in Germany, or is it there in some places and not in other places?
I definitely, you see, because it's a practice, criticizing it is part of it. Yeah. It keeps it alive. So it's nothing bad. I'm not saying this is horrible, it needs to be abolished. What I'm saying is, yes, we need to work on it. It's a constant Auseinandersetzung, working through. And memory culture, what we now call memory culture, also came from the bottom, came from survivors, from people who were, who came back, resistance fighters. And it was something that Germany didn't voluntarily adopt. It took decades to actually implement. And so I make a big difference between civil society and what came out of civil society and what's happening in civil society now, and what is happening in the political sphere. And for example, the Gedenkstätten, the, what do you call that? The former sites of concentration camps, for example. Now they're educational sites. I think they do fantastic work, and they, a lot of them try to also update their work for a sort of, how you say, post-migrant society, or I'm not a big fan of that term, but you know what I mean. For the type of society we actually live in.
Radically diverse is the one that I go with these days.
Diverse. I also quote Glissant a lot. I love his concept of creolization. I think I will at some point write something in German about that a bit deeper. But yes, so that's not where my criticism lies. My criticism lies with the sort of deriving pride from memory culture, from and kind of a coherent sort of Germanness again. We are the good people who know how to, face our deeds of the past, and that sort of puts a lock on it, and says that's something from the past, and now we're the good Germans again. And I it makes me shiver even just saying that.
I've got a couple of potential questions, and then we should probably come to the reading. But I'm just going to ask you one thing. The two of us have spoken quite a lot about, and it relates to what you're saying about this kind of settling into a kind of a comfortable and sense of a comfort and pride around memory culture. And we've spoken a lot about the kind of the misappropriation or the co-opting or even instrumentalization of writers who were previously resistant or marginalized, but have now kind of been canonized into the context in contemporary memory. So you write about Heinrich Böll, and in your Erika Mann lecture, you also kind of push back against this idea. And I wondered if you could say a little bit about that trend and how you do push back against that. Because I also know that you've been, since you gave that lecture, the Erika Mann lecture, there have been a couple of fairly prominent cancellations at the LMU in Munich, and that you've used that as a kind of a moment to speak out about that. Yes,
well, when I was invited to hold the Erika Mann lecture, and it was a great honor, and at the same time, when I researched her life and her writing, it was spectacular to me that after the war, she was never really invited back to Germany. No one really wanted to see her because she was a Nestbeschmutzerin. you know, because she had toured through America talking about. She wrote a fantastic book on National Socialism education and how they were kind of indoctrinating kids and young people, and how they were also basically dominating families. And so I felt, well, that's convenient. Now that she's dead, we're going to have a lecture in her name, and we're going to kind of appropriate her and take her, you know. And I wanted to say that she might have not been very pleased with that, you know. And it's the same with, or I wrote about that in Trotzdem Sprechen, when Mascha Gessen almost didn't get the Hannah Arendt Prize. Everybody talked about Hannah Arendt and how Hannah Arendt wouldn't have gotten the Hannah Arendt Prize herself today. And I looked at Heinrich Böll, because basically the foundation that made it so difficult for Mascha Gessen, and who was being so embarrassing, was the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And they carry a name, Heinrich Böll, of someone who wrote an article in Spiegel defending or saying that even the people from the RAF have dignity and are entitled to due process. And that simple fact that if we talk about human dignity, we mean everyone, every single human being, even Ulrike Meinhof, got him to be hounded by Springer. He actually left Germany for a while, and that's when he also wrote Die verlorene Ehre der Katharina Blum. I mean, that was an autobiographical piece of writing. And so now suddenly the foundation behaves like this with Mascha Gessen. I couldn't believe it, you know, and it enrages me that the intellectuals at the time were, you know, their life was made very difficult by the establishment, and now suddenly the establishment, you know, names their institutions. You know, also the Peter Weiss Prize and Sharon Dedua-Utu, you know, it's the same. But the intellectuals now, there doesn't seem to be a connection made, you know, that they're basically repeating the same things. And I feel, no, these people belong to us, not to you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to let you take them away from us, mm-hmm. you know. And I want to remind you why you are now carrying their name. Mm-hmm. So yes, so that is something that very much annoys me. And something else I could, for example, to give a plastic example, our Chancellor Friedrich Merz, a few weeks ago, he opened a synagogue, or he was there for the reopening of a synagogue in Munich. And there was Rachel Salamander, she's a survivor, she was a child, she was saved. She was in the audience, and he was moved to tears talking about that, about her life. And of course it's touching. But Friedrich Merz also is the grandson of a mayor of a small town in Sauerland, his grandfather was a mayor between 33 and 37. And was an NSDAP-Mitglied member. And you were not a mayor between 33 and 37 if you weren't a part of the system. That means that he probably was partly collaborating in, you know, whatever happened to the Jews in that city or town. He was part of it. And Friedrich Merz, up to this day, has not worked through. He has not publicly talked about it in any other way than just saying that his grandfather wasn't really, you know, guilty and he was a great man. And so, to me, active memory culture means that we do not have a chancellor who gets away with something like that. Mm-hmm.
We talked about the fact that he's also one of the recent scandals about his comment about the Stadtbild and how that kind of still needed work on kind of cleaning up, and how that kind of also relates very much to the theme of your book, and how, but there's so much else going on that's much more sinister and violent in the Stadtbild compared with what he's saying is the invented problem in his view, that kind of thing. So that's something that also has been kind of doing the rounds in the news and on social media. And then someone, I think it was Sibel Schick, pointed out, if anyone wants to think about the Stadtbild in Germany, they should read Asal Dardan's book Traumaland. So I promised that I would mention that. I just wanted to ask you to briefly, two of the most interesting writers that you draw on were writers that I have to confess I hadn't ever heard of. Haitham El-Wadni, or Wadni, and Doğan Akanlı. Neither of whom write or wrote in German, but they both have lots to tell us about German history and memory. Can you tell us a little bit about those two, and especially about Akanlı, who will feature in the reading, which we will then have from the book?
Yeah, well, I don't know that much about Haitham, actually. I met him, we did I write about the Hardenbergstraße, which is a street in Berlin, and one of the first refugees who committed suicide there. He jumped out of a Gerichtsgebäude,
a
court building, because he was scared of being deported back to Turkey. Mm-hmm. He was a political refugee. And so we wanted to commemorate his life, because a lot came out of that death. For example, the church asylum in Germany, the system came out of that. Also Pro Asyl, which is a non-profit organization that is dedicated to refugees, came out of that. So a lot happened, even though his name is not known, Kemal Altun. And so Haitham was one of the readers we got to read there. And Haitham wrote short story about the murder of Ulrich Jallo. And he wrote it in Arabic, but to me, the language doesn't mean that it's not a part of German literature. As well as Doğan Akanlı, which I actually think is one of the greatest German writers of his generation, even though he didn't write in German, because he wrote books that are deeply important for Germany. And if he had written in German, he would probably be published by Rowohlt, but he's published by Sujet, which is a lovely small, publisher, independent publisher. But I just wish that maybe in one or the other Deutsche LK, instead of reading Tod in Venedig, they'd read, Sankofa by Doğan Akanlı, because it is really such rich writing. And he actually always, in his practice, he was a very young man, who basically ended up in prison the first time because he picked up a communist newspaper or magazine. And then he fled Turkey and he came to Germany, and he in a way is also a collagist. He connects everything. He connects the genocide against Armenians with Dersim and Holocaust and well, I'll read it, but yeah, his writing to me is quite impactful. And I felt the way also he lived his life is somehow, I feel there's a connection between his writing or his way of thinking and mine.
Should we hear that passage
then?
Yes. Just so we decided to go for one slightly longer section of this rather than several short readings. And you should, if you want the English translation, then hopefully they've all reached you.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'll read it in German now. Das führt mich zurück nach Köln, zu Doğan Akanlı, der die meiste Zeit seines Erwachsenenlebens in dieser Stadt gelebt und gearbeitet hat. Köln war sein Exil. In einem Gespräch sagte er über sein Verhältnis zu den türkischen Machthabern und Funktionären, die ihn zur Flucht zwangen. Ich zitiere ihn. Sie können und werden mir nie verzeihen, weil ich der Mehrheitsgesellschaft angehöre und über die sozialen und politischen Themen sehr kritische Meinungen habe. Zitat Ende. Tatsächlich ging es um mehr als seine bloßen Meinungen, da er Fakten benannte, die in der Türkei bis heute offiziell verschwiegen und unterdrückt werden. Er sprach über die Gewalt, die das Fundament bildet, auf dem die türkische Nation fußt. Über den 1915 verübten Genozid an den ArmenierInnen, über die Vertreibung der GriechInnen in den frühen 20er Jahren, über das Dersim-Massaker an alevitischen KurdInnen 1937-38. Wie im Falle der Hardenbergstraße führte ihn die Beschäftigung mit der türkischen Vergangenheit auch immer wieder zurück zu Deutschland. Er zeichnete nach, wie jene Länder, die ihn als Menschen und Autor geprägt hatten, auch einander prägten. Vielleicht ein Versuch, das eigene Leben zusammenzuhalten. Gleichzeitig demonstrierte er damit, dass eine Auseinandersetzung mit der eigenen persönlichen Geschichte den Weg zu den Geschichten anderer freilegen kann. So wie Benno Ohnesorg mich zu meiner Familiengeschichte lenkte, um mich wiederum zur Frage nach der Schuld in deutschen Familien zu bringen. In seinen deutsch-türkischen Führungen im Kölner LD-Haus, das von den Nationalsozialisten als Gestapo-Dienststelle und Gefängnis genutzt wurde und heute dank einer privaten Initiative, die sich gegen einigen Widerstand durchsetzte, ein NS-Dokumentationszentrum ist, versuchte Akanlı, die Bedeutung des Ortes zu vermitteln und gleichzeitig die Verwobenheit der Anwesenden mit diesem Ort spürbar zu machen. Nicht trotz, sondern gerade wegen ihrer unterschiedlichen familiären, kulturellen oder nationalen Hintergründe. Er wusste um die Notwendigkeit, die Gewaltgeschichten des 20. Jahrhunderts, gerade auch in einer pluralen Gesellschaft, nicht national begrenzt zu erzählen. Und er wusste auch, dass die Menschen in seinen Führungen unterschiedliche Denkansätze und Prägungen mitbringen würden. Sie waren ihm vertraut. Das LD-Haus erschien ihm als angemessener Ausgangspunkt für diese Form der Erinnerungsarbeit, weil es, wie er selbst erklärte, ein Ort der Täter und Opfer zugleich sei. Ich zitiere ihn. Dort wurden Menschen gequält, gefoltert und ermordet. Dort handelte die Gestapo als Teil der nationalsozialistischen Gewaltherrschaft. Gefängnis ist ja kein Fremdwort für türkische oder kurdische Migranten. 3 Militärputsche, Abertausende Folteropfer, außergerichtliche und gerichtliche Hinrichtungen. Zitat Ende. Akanlı setzte dabei das Leid und die Verbrechen nicht gleich. Er suchte vielmehr Anknüpfungspunkte, um über persönliche Erfahrungsräume hinweg zu den historischen Momenten zu gelangen, die bis heute gesellschaftliche Aushandlungen und kollektive Selbstverständnisse maßgeblich prägen. Diese Arbeit machte das Beziehungsgeflecht sichtbar, das Menschen in ihrer Gegenwart und ihren Vergangenheiten miteinander verbindet. Der Grundstein des Hauses, durch das Akanlı die Menschen führte, wurde 1934 gelegt. Von außen wirkt es auch heute noch imposant. Sein Name leitet sich von den Initialen des Bauherrn Leopold Dahmen ab. Es sollte ihm als repräsentatives Wohn- und Geschäftsgebäude dienen, mitten in der Kölner Altstadt, wurde aber im Sommer 1935 von der Gestapo noch im Rohbau beschlagnahmt. Es steht am Appellhofplatz gegenüber dem Justizgebäude, in dem bis 1945 NS-Sondergerichte tagten. Hier wurden Scheinprozesse abgehalten und Todesurteile gesprochen, während auf der gegenüberliegenden Seite Menschen in den 4 bis 9 Quadratmeter kleinen Gefängnis- und Folterräumen im Keller um ihr Leben bangten. Heute noch kann man an den Zellwänden eine Vielzahl der Inschriften und Zeichnungen der Inhaftierten sehen. Den eigenen Namen, widerständige Parolen oder Gesichter, geschrieben mit Kreide, Kohle oder Bleistift, eingeritzt mit Eisennägeln, Schrauben oder Fingernägeln. Sie saßen teilweise in 10-facher Überbelegung in diesen Zellen, durften nur 2-mal am Tag die Toilette benutzen, erhielten täglich nur 2 Scheiben Brot und eine dünne Suppe. Ich habe einige Gedenkstätten besucht, auch von ehemaligen Konzentrationslagern. Doch dies ist für mich die erste gewesen, die sich direkt im Zentrum einer Stadt befindet. Wenn man durch die engen Flure und Räume läuft, weiß man, dass die Schreie der Gefolterten gehört werden konnten. Man hörte und roch sie ebenso, wie man die hunderte Menschen hörte und roch, die im Innenhof hingerichtet wurden. Roch den Dreck, in dem sie gefangen gehalten wurden. Diese Vorstellung deckt sich mit dem, was ich über die Zeit des Nationalsozialismus weiß und ist doch nicht integrierbar in mein Wissen und Erleben von Raum und Stadt, von Menschen und Zwischenmenschlichem. Ich kenne die Fakten, zum Beispiel, dass im gesamten Kölner Stadtgebiet, sowohl im Zentrum wie auch in den Vororten, hunderte Lager existierten, in denen ZwangsarbeiterInnen und Kriegsgefangene interniert wurden. Sie waren Verschleppte, die genötigt wurden, in Kölner Betrieben und Firmen zu arbeiten. Man sah sie, man hörte sie, man roch den Dreck, den man ihnen zumutete. Ein von der SS bewachtes Lager, in das sie bis zu Tausenden Sintize und Romnia gebracht wurden, befand sich direkt an einem Sportplatz in Köln-Bickendorf. Menschen nutzten diesen Sportplatz in ihrer Freizeit, konnten die festgehaltenen sehen, hören, riechen. Von hier aus wurden jene, die bis 1938 noch lebten, in die deutschen Konzentrations- und Vernichtungslager deportiert. Nach Mai 1940 wurde das Lager aufgelöst, weil niemand mehr übrig war. Man sah, hörte und roch sie und tat es doch nicht. Für unsichtbar erklärte Körper, namenlos erklärte Menschen, bereits für tot erklärt von jenen, die um sie herum lebten. Die Wohnwägen und Gegenstände, die sie hinterließen, muss jemand weggeschafft haben. Jemand muss gewusst haben, dass die EigentümerInnen nicht mehr zurückkehren würden. Akanle wollte zeigen, welche Verbindungen es gab zwischen dem Jetzt und den Menschen, die Teil der deutschen Gewaltgeschichte geworden waren. Ihre Abwesenheit im Hier sollte sichtbar werden. Er erzählte von türkischen Staatsangehörigen, die Opfer des Nationalsozialismus wurden, darunter der in Köln lebende Kaufmann Salomon Freud, der gemeinsam mit seiner Ehefrau Hedwig und seinem Sohn Alfred im Jahr 1942 deportiert wurde. Er sprach auch über den überlebenden Isaac Beha, der 1923 in Berlin zur Welt kam. Seine sephardische Familie war 1915 von Istanbul dorthin gezogen, weil seine Eltern sich vor den Feindseligkeiten, den im Osmanischen Reich lebenden Minderheiten, Griechen, Armenier und Juden, zunehmend ausgesetzt sahen. Fürchtete. Am Beispiel von Behas Geschichte konnte Akanle über beide Länder sprechen und die Frage nach jenen Mechanismen stellen, die dazu führen, dass vergleichsweise offene und plurale Gesellschaften wie das Osmanische Reich und die Weimarer Republik sich so rapide gegen Minderheiten wenden können. Das ist keine bloße an die Geschichte gestellte Frage, denn autoritäre und faschistische Bewegungen breiten sich auch heute wieder weltweit aus, gehen auf die Straßen, gewinnen Wahlen, ziehen in Parlamente ein, übernehmen Regierungen. Ich möchte verstehen, wie die Gewalttätigkeiten politischer Emotionen sich in wenigen Jahren an den Realitäten vorbei zu realer politischer Gewalt transformieren lassen. Das Wissen, wohin solche Bewegungen führen, reicht offensichtlich nicht aus, um sie aufzuhalten. Für Isaac Behas Eltern Nissim und Lea und seine beiden älteren Schwestern Allegrina und Jeanne bedeutete die Flucht nach Deutschland keine Rettung. Es wurde zum todbringenden Exil. Isaac war 19 Jahre alt, als seine Familie im Dezember 1942 vom Güterbahnhof Grünewald nach Auschwitz deportiert wurde. Sein Entkommen war Zufall. Er war nicht zu Hause, als die Gestapo unangekündigt auftauchte. Er nahm sonntags stets den Stern an seiner Jacke ab und ging zu seiner Freundin Inge, wenngleich seine Mutter sich große Sorgen um ihn machte. Ich zitiere aus seiner Autobiografie. Ich wusste um die Ängste meiner Mutter. Auf der anderen Seite konnte ich mein Glück kaum fassen. Eine junge Frau, eine bildhübsche noch dazu, war in mich verliebt. In mich, der ich ständig geduckt und gedemütigt wurde. Den Israel, der durch den Stern gebrandmarkt war. der immer Angst haben musste, aufzufallen, einen Fehler zu machen, der jederzeit schlichter Willkür zum Opfer fallen konnte. Und nun war ich jemandem begegnet, der sich zu mir bekannte. Eine Frau, die mir, wenn auch nur für 2 Stunden jeden Sonntag, das Gefühl gab, ein ganz normaler junger Mann zu sein. Und doch, noch dazu war ich in meine Inge verknallt. Dieses Stückchen Leben wollte ich mir nicht nehmen lassen, auch nicht von meiner Mutter. Zitat Ende. Nachdem seine Eltern und Schwestern abgeholt wurden, ging er in den Untergrund, lebte wie tausende Juden und Jüdinnen als sogenanntes U-Boot in Berlin. Er entkam mehrmals knapp der Deportation und überlebte durch die Hilfe einer Handvoll großzügiger Menschen als einziger seiner Familie. Lange Zeit wurde angenommen, dass seine Eltern und Schwestern nach Riga gebracht wurden, so steht es auf den Stolpersteinen vor ihrem früheren Wohnhaus. Doch sie kamen nach Auschwitz und wurden dort noch am Tag ihrer Ankunft ermordet. You know, reading this now, I haven't read it for a while. Just 3 days ago, I was at the Polish Institute for reading, and I actually met the artist. He's a Polish Jew that was born in April 45, who built the memorial site at this Grunewald platform where the Jews were deported. Him as well, a Polish Jew.
So those connections do actually happen in real life.
It's
right?
amazing.
It's not just that you're bringing associations together. Those moments actually, you had a moment where something that you've written about through this book came to you as well. So thank you so much. I think hopefully that gives you a really good idea of both how intricate Asal's writing is, but also how wide-ranging and how much you cover and how you weave it all together. I wanted to ask you, do you think, do you see Akanle as as a model for intellectual intervention in German memory work? And do you think, or how does his own life as a Turkish dissident and moving across borders and languages shape his approach to history and memory?
It's a difficult question because I'm always opposed to turning people into models or icons or heroes, because I feel building people up as such actually is a trap, because on the one hand it's much easier to tear them down if in the end they turn out not to have been perfect, which nobody is. And on the other hand, it sort of inhibits other people to sometimes make a decision that maybe later on will be seen as heroic, because I think we're all capable of such acts, even though statistically we won't be heroes, but I do think that his curiosity and his, like him, I cherish doing. He also, with students, he made this project. I forgot the name, but it's a website basically that is also a little. It's basically places around the Hardenbergstraße, which I mentioned, where the synagogue burned, and also where we have the Breitscheidplatz, where several years ago there was a attack with a car,
Christmas market,
Christmas market. Yeah. And so he made this map. But I think recently I talked to someone who writes about Turkish heritage in Berlin. And she said that Akanle also missed a few things. I think I admire his work, but I don't want to say he's a model. I think what makes him special is also that he also, he derived of other, like this classic novel, Sabatinali, Madonna in a fur coat. He picked that novel up because it's also set in Berlin in the late 20s, early 30s. It's a Turkish man who falls in love with a Polish Jewish woman. And he revisits this novel. So I feel I would like to think of our literatures as in conversation and building this together. You know, Akanle kind of needs Sabatinali and I need them, and you know, I would rather look at it like that.
That makes a lot of sense. It's really nicely put. A few pages after that section that you just read to us, you quote our colleague Ezra Özürek, Subcontractors of Guilt. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how you relate Ezra's work to what Akanle was doing.
Yes, well, he did these Turkish language tours through this former Gestapo prison. And you could sort of feel like he's doing what has sort of become a mainstream idea, that foreigners need to be educated. You know, they're in the deficit. That's how she puts it. So, you know, and I hope I do her work justice, but that's not what his intention was. It was more of bringing together the histories and showing how connected they are. He would talk about German generals who were in the Ottoman Empire and helped during the genocide, you know, were architects in a way of the genocides against the Armenians, and also Talat Pasha, who was one of the main people responsible for it. He was in exile. He had exile in Berlin, and he was murdered there by an Armenian in Berlin, actually not far from the Hardenbergstrasse, or actually in the Hardenbergstrasse. So he wanted to show how connected these histories are, and he also knew, as he says in this quote, prison is not something we don't know about as people from Turkey. And in the Süddeutsche Zeitung, Sonja Zekri wrote about my book that you sort of have this thought that maybe someone who fled, for example, Assad's prisons, might even know much better how authoritarianism works and how terror works, bodily works in your life, than we would as people who grew up in a pretty peaceful Germany. So Akanle was not in this paternalistic tradition of we Germans know best and we're going to educate you and you're the problem, or importierter Antisemitismus, or we, you know, he wanted to much more show how histories of violence are connected, and thought of it as an exchange, eye-to-eye exchange, rather than top-down. And so I feel what he did was, in a way, what in
Subcontractors of Guilt.
Subcontractors of Guilt is sort of the message of, you know, there needs to be a exchange, rather than viewing the foreigner once again, or the other, as the deficitäre object, you know, instead of the subject that is part of society and that you build memory culture with. Right. Also because I feel like when I went to schools last week in Cologne and read there, and there was a Kurdish girl that came to me, and she instantly knew what I was talking about. You know, a 16-year-old girl. I don't need to educate her on the Holocaust. Not really, you know, maybe about the specific details of it, you know, but it's not like she doesn't understand what we're talking about.
It's the opposite. There's a wealth of knowledge there that can feed into and complicate and shatter, as you said, that kind of the dominant narratives that have taken hold.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm conscious of the time, and
yes.
I've got lots more questions, but I would like to open up to the audience. We've got another 20 minutes or so, and there is a roving mic which Miriam will bring round to you. Does anyone want to kick off in the audience?
I'm not so used to speaking about my work in English. I hope that
doesn't show.
Okay.
Also, I think most people in the audience do speak German,
yeah,
so
okay.
A little bit of Denglish is fine.
Denglish is fine.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. It's been very interesting, and my question actually arises from another module on our course here,
Yes.
which is focused on contemporary German memory culture, on memory work. And what we look at there is partly kind of intermediality. That is ways in which memory work, to be done in the best way, probably needs to work between media. And I was struck by your background. You talked about your MA or your BA thesis, but in film, right?
Yeah.
Film related to the Holocaust. What do you think about different media as a writer?
Yes.
There's something which you no doubt want to achieve through that specific medium. But,
Yes.
but do you need to think to visual culture? Do you need to think to film, say, as well?
That's such a fantastic question. I already complained to Tara that I always end up in my readings mainly doing like anti-racist work instead of also being able to talk as a writer, you know, because I do actually care a lot about language. And yes, I wanted to I wanted to write my PhD on, which I never finished, on traumatic narration. So how trauma is not the content, but the form is traumatic, okay? And I think literature is probably the art form that leads you best to subjectivity, leads you into someone's experience. And that's why I you know, like for example, Christa Wolf or Brigitte Reimann in the Hoyerswerda chapter, I noticed their books they don't tell their stories chronologically because that's not how trauma is told, you know. And it's very striking that both Reimann and Wolf choose to, even both have in their novels I write about, they suddenly don't talk about an I, they talk about a her, das Kind, or die Frau, because there's a break in identification because trauma doesn't let you inhabit that experience, or you can only, and how are you going to share that experience if not through literature and art? And film, for me, it was really, why I started my PhD was actually the film The Pawnbroker by Sidney Lumet. It's a late 60s film. And what was striking when I saw this film and it shattered me. Because it ends with the Holocaust survivor having a young Hispanic boy in his arms who's been shot, and he's lost his wife and his children in the Holocaust, and he suddenly is confronted again with a death, and he has a silent cry. You just see the actor opening his mouth, and nothing comes out. And then later on, I read up about this, and there was a big controversy about the film because the Jew is unsympathetic. He's greedy, he's vengeful, he's hostile. There's a woman who has a love interest in him, and he just like brushes her off. And I thought, wow, I actually totally sympathized with him. Yeah, he's hostile, but I suddenly understood, why is it that victims have to be palatable? Why do they have to be beautiful or kind or morally superior? And how horrible is that we ask that of them? And I think art can actually also show you that this sort of moral ambiguity, or that there is actually a true human and what it actually means to be a human, and that it actually means to maybe make mistakes or be horrible to people, and that you still don't deserve to be murdered, you know. Which art form is going to, how are you going to know about that? How are you going to feel that if not through art or literature? So I think also because memory culture, it's the stories we tell ourselves, right? It's how we tell our stories of ourselves, and we look to the past to understand, to find orientation, and to understand how we came here. So I wouldn't know how else to even understand what history is if not through stories. Yes.
It's really interesting and striking that within your essayistic writing, you often turn to fiction and literature at the moments when you need help with the ambiguity of it. Or I don't know if it's help as such, but though it struck me when I was writing how often you turn to a novel or how often you turn to creative writing in that sense when it needs to be more complicated than anything else you can find.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would say that's us messy Kulturwissenschaftler, who don't know anything properly. But no, I don't differentiate between text for me, literature is as true as, a historic document, because it is a historic document. It's how someone perceived their reality, or how someone felt they needed to talk about their life. So in a sense, it's just as true as anything else. A newspaper article, I mean, sometimes if you read newspaper articles, you can always detect the ideology behind it,
Are there any other questions in the audience? We've still got plenty of time. Is there one? Sorry, did I miss? Oh, yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. I was really interested in your what you had to say about the sort of connected histories of, I suppose, perpetration, guilt, shame. I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on, what you've learned about, I suppose, as you said, German kind of familial experiences actually of guilt, shame, perpetration.
Yeah. In my first book, Reflections of a Barbarian, I have one essay where I write about the NSU trials, and I look at the trials as a story of German families, because the victims were also, and their families and the people who fought for years that these murders were acknowledged as racist murders are also German families, and that also is connected to Hanau. Philipp Gohmann, the father of Mercedes Kirpatsch, one of the 9 people who were murdered in Hanau, he said that his grandfather was killed in Auschwitz. They're from a Romani family, Rom. And now his daughter was murdered by a racist. And that is German, that's also German family, you see. And that's why I feel the families of the perpetrators, they have a moral obligation to understand that it is not in the past, that if someone like Philipp Gohmann can say that about his family in Germany, then the other families need to also address their family history. It is not only, I feel it plays a collective, it's not only about biographical work or individual responsibility. I think it's something that we owe each other. And the sort of silence around it. I met a young teacher who was a teacher in Sachsen, and he said he can't handle it, he's giving up. Because every time he talks about this period, or he gave them, the children in his class, a project, go home and find out about your grandparents. The parents went berserk. They did not want it. And I wonder why. I don't understand. And I have in the Hoyerswerda chapter, I talk about Ottfried Preußler and his father, who was also a collaborator, and how difficult it was for Preußler to address that. And I understand it's difficult, but it's not only something that happens in the moral sphere or ethical. It is a material question, I mean, if we really would thoroughly research where all the wealth comes from in Germany, the German economical system would collapse, So at least have the, Demut or decency or whatever to work through this, because I truly believe, trauma, in a way, is a moral-free term, because in a way everyone can be traumatized, even the perpetrators can be traumatized, right? I mean, I do see a moral difference or attach moral value to it, or I think there is a difference between the trauma of the perpetrators. But of course it impacts the society we live in, you know? And so I think it is an act of, I'm very big on the word solidarity, and I think it's an act of solidarity, and it's also something maybe people should owe themselves, you know, to just know. Because I've met a lot of people in my readings that tell me, oh, only after my father died could I research my grandparents' history, and it's really opened up so much for me. So you're actually also doing something for yourself, I believe.
I wondered if you wouldn't mind saying some more about the formal qualities of trauma narratives. I was really interested in that. And you mentioned the third person as a possible. I guess the second person is also a possible. What other formal aspects do you notice in narratives of trauma?
Yeah, often there's a repetition, but it always stops where the traumatic incident is repeated, you know. So you kind of, it's almost like a road you walk, and then when you can also see it in The Pawnbroker. It was one of the first films that did a sort of not flashback, just like you end up in the past, but it kind of cut between present and past, and then suddenly you were in the past, so you were thrown back and forth. But then the flashback in the past ended where it really got traumatic. You know, where when you couldn't visit what was. But I mean, I wanted to, for example, write about Bergman's The Seventh. What's the film called? Ingmar Bergman, Das Siebte Kreuz, which is a film also about, war, but it's not really, you know, it doesn't tell you. Or there was a Japanese film I wanted to look at, Onibaba, which is about, it's called Demon Women, which is also not really about the war, but is in a way. So it's a lot of, disruption, and because trauma in a way means that time dissolves. You are not in the present and not in the past. You're in, you know, it's like you don't know where you are. It's a dissolution of I, and it's time. So, and that often that will happen narratively, that you don't know where place is, you don't know where you are, because it's a sort of not being able to leave the past, you know.
Super interesting, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. And can I just build on that by linking it to the idea of mapping?
Yes.
And your starting point with the idea of the Landkarte, and having thought about that in relation to trauma, how were you connecting those two things in your mind, thinking about these questions of disorientation and location? Because you're offering a really thought-provoking view of a map that is drawing really thought-provoking connections that also look different to different people. And I wondered whether you were thinking about how that map might point us somewhere or help us to navigate.
Yes. Well, my intention with this book was, in a way, to, like a sort of Mehrfachbelichtung, you know, put these different maps on top of each other, and then we, you know, like almost like each layer is transparent, and so you can see all the layers. Maybe it's also because I'm very famous for always getting lost. I really have a horrible sense of direction. So in a way, navigating myself through a city or something is always slightly upsetting to me, you know. I'm always, and I also tell, the first time I was in Berlin, it was with my school. It was a school trip, and we went to the Martin Gropiusbau, and I just couldn't believe that there were actual, holes from the Second World War. Like, you could see the shooting, and somehow in that instance, it's like you're there. You're like, you wonder, how was it at this? I am at this historic, and just this. This experience that you're in streets where other people lived their lives is so overwhelming sometimes that I feel. And the question also I pose is, do these places have some sort of aura? Or I mean, I'm not an esoteric person, but if you go to a place and something horrific has happened there, does the place itself tell you something about it? And my conclusion in a way is no, we have to mark it. We are the people who have to bring something to this place to make it speak to us. And because, for example, when I was in Dessau, I visited the site of a third racist murder. It was a young Chinese student. She actually studied at the Bauhaus, and she wanted to go back to China to build houses, also for her parents. But the son of a policewoman had a fetish about Asian women, and he killed her and disposed of her in a bin. And I went there to see where her body was discarded. And there was hardly anything, And because I knew this had happened there, it was so horrific to me that it was just a normal backyard. And that was one of the worst moments for me, writing this book. It really shattered me, a human being disposed like that. And I hope, and I'm sure in a few years, someone will put something there, because this place needs to be marked somehow. But it's down to us, and I think that's also part of memory culture. In the end, it doesn't matter if a memorial site is well done or not. It offers a discursive moment. It offers us something to talk about or keep it in our memory. I hope I answered your question. Yes.
I really like the idea of the superimposed maps on top of each other.
Yes.
And that kind of, both within like one particular site, but also kind of moving outwards. Is that?
That's why this book for me was not going to be only about racism or, post 45. Because I don't believe in those sort of, that's artificial to me,
We're pretty much out of time.
Yes.
Unless anyone has any pressing questions. And I did have a whole load of other questions about
there
translation.
Was a question.
Should we just take one very last quick question? Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you just say a little bit more about the essayistic form, and maybe also in connection to what you were saying about memory is a practice and not something you are? Do you think writing essays or writing essayistically lends itself more to that, or does it let you access different themes or find a different language to access these themes as compared to writing a novel or short stories or whatever?
I don't know. It's just the form I prefer writing in. It's what comes to me naturally, the essay. You can also write an essay about. Recently, there was an essay about how it's embarrassing to have a boyfriend or something. You can also. It has nothing to do with memory, So. But I think, yes, the best essays, they tell us something about our time and go beyond it. They offer, I think the mirror image is what I expect of an essay, the best of essays. And like, for example, an essayist I adore is Hilton Als, and he has this lovely, he has a lovely essay about falling in love with a straight man. and this straight man being his best friend, and they're kind of inseparable, and there's a love, but it's sort of also a sad love story, a heartbreak story. And I'm not a black man, and I'm also not a gay man, and I learned so much about love from that essay. But I also learned a lot about being a black gay man in the 80s and 90s in New York when AIDS happened, you know? So I learned something about a very specific time, about a very specific experience that I would never know about because it's so far from my own experience. But I also learned something about myself in it, and I think that's what the essay can do. But not saying that novels can't do that either.
Thank you so much. That's a really good point to end as well. So
Yes.
Literature in all its forms as media of knowledge is definitely something that we all think about and work on a lot. Thank you so much, Asal, for coming and for talking to us, for reading, for writing the book. Please read the book if you haven't already. And we can carry on these conversations outside over a drink. Thank you also all for coming and for your questions. And yeah, please join us afterwards for a drink. Thank you.
Thank you also for the elegant translation. I feel very honored about that.